Hello and welcome to another Razor Wire. This is James Reese, and today I'm going to be interviewing Corey Williams. He's the head of marketing for identity security for CyberArk. It's fantastic to have you on the channel. Do you want to kind of give yourself a bit of an intro?
Yeah, thanks, James. Appreciate you having me on today. Looking forward to this discussion. I'm Corey Williams. I'm from a company called CyberArk, one of the leading providers of what we'll talk about later today, identity and access management solutions in the security space. But I've been doing cybersecurity for the past probably 15 years. I've been in very adjacent spaces in IT for the last 25 years total. It's great to be here today.
Fantastic. No, it's great to have you, and it's very pertinent content at the moment because identity management is kind of quite big on the ticket item. I mean, we're coming out. I say we're coming out, but in the UK, we're coming out of a second lockdown. I know you've had a series of lockdowns in various different parts of the over in the States. Some have been longer than others. And the rest of the world, I mean, we've got half of Europe now locking down again for periods of time. And I've seen a lot in the media about this kind of massive shift we're going to have to do in infosec as part of the ongoing thing. Because I mean, this pandemic and the cause of it, I'm not going to mention it because old YouTube doesn't like this particular word, but it's caused such a change in the way that we work, and in the media you're seeing a lot more big organizations, medium-sized organizations all now starting to say it's going to be a work from anywhere kind of situation. First it was kind of work from home, but in the last week I've noticed quite a bit coming out in some quite big media channels saying this organization has decided a work from anywhere. So it's brilliant to have you on the channel, and it'll be fantastic to get some of your insights. But I mean, to begin, I mean, what's your history? How did you get into this? I mean, what was the beginning of Corey's journey?
Yeah, I mean, I graduated college and started my career with Hewlett Packard in IT. I actually was fortunate to join a really interesting group at the time. It was the Enterprise Directory Group, and they sort of had this sort of service as an IT that they provided to all the different parts of IT and the business to help drive applications, to help drive development, to help drive business processes. And being part of the directory services group, I was able to help be involved in a lot of different aspects of IT. Excuse me. And that sort of started my career, and it kind of set me on this path because there was always this kind of small group of people off on the side working on cybersecurity projects. One of them was Kerberos. If people aren't familiar with that technology, it's to make it easier to have sort of enterprise authentication that isn't a password. It's sort of an ephemeral one-time token that can be used to help authenticate people each time they log in. There's a reason you could get access to your email by just opening Outlook. It already knew who you were and let you right in. That was Kerberos underneath. So that was the start of my career, and I kind of stayed in that business process automation middleware space, kind of connecting front office applications to back office applications for about a decade. Eventually, I ended up in the cybersecurity space, and the reason was because I found an area. I like working for small startup companies, and I found myself wanting to find one that was, I didn't know exactly what they did, but I knew they solved a hard problem. And the hard problem for me was always that, how to integrate stuff with Active Directory. So middle of my career was all about making stuff work with Active Directory from a security perspective. So, and from there, I kind of ended up in the last 15 years in what is called the identity and access management space of cybersecurity.
Yeah, I mean, it's this kind of space has been around for a while, but it's only recently it's really started to kick off. I think, I mean, it started obviously before the pandemic, getting more and more important. But as I just kind of mentioned before, it started to get to a point now where it's been massively expedited from where it was, a
Mhm.
year ago. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, is it obviously, you're working for one of the main players in this field. So what are you seeing in the market? Are you seeing a massive uptick, more interest?
Well, certainly this latest wave of change that's affecting IT organizations related to remote work and more distributed models is causing a lot of interest in how do we address that. I can tell you over the last couple of decades, there's been several different waves. The first one was actually Microsoft Exchange, interestingly enough, in the news quite a bit lately in terms of some major exploits that they had. But in the 90s and for a couple of decades, it was the center of many IT organizations' infrastructure. Everything tied into Active Directory because Active Directory was responsible for driving Exchange, and Exchange was adopted as the mail servers for 95% of organizations. It was quite impressive penetration that they got. So that was one wave. Another wave was when Linux started becoming popular in the data center. And that drove a whole bunch of changes that people had to address. And then because it didn't tie into things like Active Directory. And then the next wave was mobile. You saw a
Yeah.
whole wave of mobile users trying to access enterprise resources, and that became a whole challenge. And then, of course, the last wave before this pandemic was the rise of cloud infrastructure and public and private cloud applications. And I think so. What I've seen over my career is there's always some big wave that changes the fundamental nature of how you adopt technology to improve business and business process. And yeah, this latest one related to remote work is definitely had a lot of implications in our thinking.
I mean, what are the significant challenges, in your career with the whole identity management side of things? What are the significant challenges you've experienced? Is it a case of adoption that people just don't understand it, or they love it, but maybe it was difficult to implement back in the day? I mean, obviously, everything's gotten a whole lot easier to implement. I remember days when in order to look at your firewall rule set, you had to you had to go into the terminal and try and discern what was going on, in something that could scroll for a long time. But with your area, I mean, what are the most significant challenges?
I think that the challenges are probably pretty common to what you've heard from other areas of cybersecurity. The number one thing I've found throughout my career is that outside of the experts in our area, it's viewed a little bit like a black box. They don't quite understand what it is, the implications of it, and so on. And so with identity, there is a lot of trivia and nuance and detail in how it works and why it's important. And I think that the biggest challenge we've had, and it's one of the reasons that I kind of shifted my career. When I started my career, I started out as kind of a consultant, pre and post sales consultant. I was the one helping businesses adopt technology and show them how it works and make it work for them. And what I found is that the biggest challenge was not making these technologies work, whether it was in middleware or whether it was in this security space. It was about communicating to people why they needed it and how it was going to solve that need and what the benefit of that was. And that's why I've gravitated more towards the evangelism, the communications side, the marketing side. And I come from a very technical background. I have degrees in computer science and mathematics and engineering. I thought I was going to, build the next Death Star. I mean, I thought I was going to be the one that did something great. And what I found is that I really loved explaining technology more than I liked building it, and that was just my career path. And so, so I found that and that's a lot because that's where I saw the biggest challenge. Is that in cybersecurity, we often think about the deep level technology aspects of cybersecurity. And what I found is the biggest need was explaining how important cybersecurity was to the rest of the business.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the biggest challenge that I've seen. It's defined my career path, is to demystify these technologies. With identity in particular, it's a challenge because there's really interesting technological drivers to it, and there's also a variety of kind of fragments within the identity market. Today, we kind of see three main areas of identity. One is what you would consider access management. That's things like authentication and being able to provide single sign-on across various applications. The second area that you see is governance and administration. Mm-hmm. This is how do I get a new employee out of the HR directory and make sure that he is provisioned into all the different systems he needs with the right permissions, and that those permissions are reviewed on a regular basis. So it's much more about workflow and process. And the third area of identity is called privileged access management. And this is about taking that really kind of low-level access that is given to IT administrators and to applications and infrastructures to operate on an ongoing basis. Think about like the Unix root user or an admin, a local admin on a Windows box. Those type of accounts wield a lot of power within an organization, and there's a lot of technology that's sprung up around managing that process to make sure it's secure. And those three areas make sense to an identity person. But outside of identity, it's all just sort of, I know that's a hard problem to solve. We need to solve it, but they don't really kind of connect the dots as to why it's important.
Have you found that there's a bit of a challenge around the amount of interconnecting technologies we now have? I mean, you mentioned the kind of cloud. Obviously, Active Directory is still a thing even today. You know, we're all going to Office 365 and trying to. I do get the impression sort of way back when we didn't have that kind of stuff. Weirdly enough, which is pretty strange, really, it was a lot easier to get it to work in a single unit. You know, everybody came into the office. Everybody, you had your routes in for those home workers or mobile workers, but you tended to have like one big set of systems that everybody would access. Whereas now it's I've got this as a service, I've got that infrastructure over there, or I've got a database in some other part of the world. Getting identity to work collectively without making it a mess must be quite a challenge.
It is. It's one of the big value adds that I think the industry has, is that they spend a lot of time looking at all the different pockets of the organization and the IT and ensuring that there is a common model to manage identity and access across all those different types of infrastructures and applications and devices. That's probably the main value add that identity companies provide. But you bring up a good point, which is security used to be a little bit, I don't want to say easier, but a little bit more common, in that we would try to create these strong barriers with firewalls and VPNs and various tools, and then try to put all the good people and protected stuff inside and keep all the bad people and bad effects outside. And as simplistic as I made that sound, that's the way cybersecurity ran for a long time. But all these different waves that we talked about really kind of over time have eroded that model quite a bit. It's not that there's not important to have those firewalls and try to keep bad guys out, but the fact is that that the majority of work is not happening inside that perimeter anymore. It's happening on a user's personal device, on a public network, accessing a public cloud, and it's hard to force everyone back through that perimeter to just have that model. And so security has had to adapt to meet these new challenges. And this is going to get worse with the networks we build for IoT, with 5G and with remote work. All these things are additional pressures that are dissolving that traditional barrier approach. And so, one of the things that is common, no matter where a user is or what device he's using or what application he's accessing, every one of those layers has identity involved in it. And you can put controls around identity, and that defense in depth can become more virtualized and associated with the user's identity and what they should be allowed to access and decision making can be done more dynamically and closer to the resource that they're trying to access. And I think that's what's exciting about identity is that it used to be this sort of, it was almost like a database. It just was this required layer to make work so that everything else would work. And it's shifted from that sort of IT side of the house into the security side of the house, because now once the network works, right, you need less and less operational expertise around the network. And then you need more and more policy and monitoring around the network. The same thing is happening with identity. As it becomes easier, it's less about making it work and integrating it. It's more about how it can help you make good decisions, identify risks, and mitigate them dynamically. And I think that's a big shift that we're seeing in identity. Is it's moving from more of an IT operations responsibility to more of the CISO's responsibility going forward.
Do you see that causing, just out of interest, do you see that causing, to a certain extent, maybe a little bit of friction between IT departments and security people? Because you're absolutely right. Traditional infosec people used to usually be a part of that IT department. Let's face it, more often than not, they were working under the CIO. And I mean, I'm a firm believer that role definitely shouldn't be there, because assurance in that kind of role is really difficult. But now we're starting to see a lot of the tools being sort of migrated and managed by the security department. And of course, whilst we still have quite a few of us who are, come from an IT background, good IT knowledge. We have to for what we do. It's almost pulling a certain amount of the work and management of infrastructure, or at least access to that infrastructure in this case, from that IT department. So do you sometimes, when you interact with these organizations, do you sometimes see that friction? Is that actually there?
I do, of course. I think that there's always that tension that's inherent with, trying. There's the old joke that cybersecurity departments are sort of seen as the department of no, right? We're the ones that tell you can't do something, and I think so. Of course, as stuff transitions more and more to the security side of the house, there is that friction. But I'm also seeing another trend, which is the security departments are becoming more and more aligned with the business. In fact, we're seeing, we even see companies now starting to have what they call BISOs, or business information security officers, that think more holistically around the risk of their entire business department, including the cyber risk, and then they align with the technology risk folks that are more traditionally in the IT or CISO department, and that's one interesting aspect. The other interesting aspect is that I would say that the leaders in cybersecurity are becoming more aware of the needs and the drivers and the importance that the business has over their decisions. Because if you think about it, cybersecurity at the end of the day is actually pretty easy. I make this joke everywhere I go, right? Just unplug everything, and then it's fine. You won't have any breaches, right? You only have to deal with physical security. The problem is that drives productivity to zero. The whole reason we adopt technology is to speed our advance in bringing new customer experiences to market, new business models, adopting more automation to get more out of the resources we have. That's the purpose of technology. And so cybersecurity, by definition, should have a balance between protecting the asset and making it as productive as possible, because that's the whole purpose of our job. Is to, if it wasn't for these technological assets, we wouldn't need cybersecurity people. And the reason we adopt technology is to run business. And so that's one of my biggest pieces of advice that I give to all my customers is become more business savvy. And there's an insurance aspect to cybersecurity. Let's protect bad things from happening, from risks being realized. But there's other elements as well. Let's make the business more productive. Let's give them the confidence to adopt new business models and new customer experiences quickly. And I think that mindset is one of the shifts I'm seeing as well, that CISOs are becoming not just the compliance department, they're going much beyond that and becoming a critical part of building the confidence for organizations to move quickly without fear And I think that's a mindset that we should be teaching people at a much earlier stage. That there's purpose to what they do, not just as an insurance policy, but to actually enable the business to operate quickly and to adapt quickly. And that's the kind of exciting part of my job, is to have those conversations with customers.
And absolutely. I mean, one of the quotes I've always loved. It's a quote from way back in the sort of 1800s. Um, First rule of business is to protect your investment. And one of the things I always teach when I'm mentoring people is, you look at that business element. That is what you're there to protect. You're not there to protect, you know, the widgets and the gadgets necessarily. That's part of it, but you have to have that overall big picture view. What am I actually protecting? What within this? How can I protect this organization so it can carry on generating the revenue, providing the services, and, as you say, the customer journeys and values and all the rest of it, in a way that they're not, or they're going to have a less chance of experiencing some kind of security event that's going to completely shatter their business. I mean, God forbid, look at SolarWinds. I'm going to use them as an example. Everybody knows about that now. One event, one screw up, and it was a monumental one, to be honest. And boom, that's it. You've lost your business, your customers. I mean, they're probably still operating, but let's face it. We've been hearing in the market a lot more people who've been saying, I'm getting rid of that kit and moving over to other stuff. And I think the other thing that we're starting to experience in the infosec field is this shift to, malicious actors are now actively attacking vendors. They're actively attacking they've been attacking third parties for a while now, but now seemingly the vendors that are producing these solutions are being targeted as well. I mean, it's crazy, to for a malicious actor to get access to the code base, an update, or the actual code base for your product, and inject a backdoor in is every vendor's worst nightmare, really, isn't it? Especially if they've released that update and they haven't caught it in their sort of DevSecOps process.
You bring up a really interesting point, and it's one that I hear in so many conversations today. This was a security ISV vendor selling an automated update product to their customers, and that's what got affected. And so in essence, SolarWinds is a digital business. They are in the process. They're in the business of giving that technology to a customer, maintaining it for them remotely. What I'm hearing is across the board. And if you think about it, this last year in particular made this even worse. If you didn't have a digital business in the last year, you didn't do very well in the economy, right? If you didn't have an online presence, and that's the biggest trend we're hearing in business is a accelerating 5 years worth of strategy into 6 months worth of effort to try to accelerate digital business initiatives. Every company is thinking about their digital business in an accelerated way. And so what I've heard is from a cybersecurity perspective is that the shift is moving from, you kind of think about cybersecurity as someone getting access to the back end, my financials, my intellectual property, or whatever. Most companies are concerned about that, but that isn't their main driver. Their main concern is the availability and integrity of their digital business facing their customers.
Yeah.
If you get into my back end and I've got to, notify existing customers, that's it's annoying. There's a cost to it. If my digital business goes down, my revenue stream stops.
That's it.
And I think that is the biggest mind shift I've seen in the last 5 years in conversations, is that people don't want to hear about front office, back office, IT. They want to hear about how we're helping protect the digital business, which is their lifeblood. And it's become an existential thing for companies to have a cybersecurity strategy in those areas, because they like you said, you don't get a lot of chances to screw up a customer experience.
So if somebody wanted to get into your field, I mean, let's say, student straight out of uni, or, maybe they've worked in IT for a while, want to make that change over, what would be your recommendations to people looking to do that? I mean, is there, what I loved, one thing that you mentioned a little while back about communication skills, and it's something, strangely enough, everybody I've interviewed pretty much to a person has said, communication is everything. If you can't get that right, information security as a career is going to be somewhat difficult.
Yeah.
But what
Yeah.
would you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of two different aspects. I'll talk about the avenues in a second, but in terms of skills, I absolutely agree. I think I've alluded to a couple. One is having an understanding outside of just the technical aspects of cybersecurity. That's sort of table stakes. Whatever areas of cybersecurity you're interested in, you're going to have to build those skills. And by the way, that doesn't change after you get the job. It's a lifelong learning, right? The attackers don't stop innovating, so you're never going to stop learning. And so it's that learning mindset, but also having some of the basic skills around technology. On top of that, you have to have good communication skills, both in writing and in presentation and verbal skills as well, because a lot of cybersecurity is about consulting with different parts of the organization, and that is a communication, a teaching. It's a project management aspect, and so communication is surprisingly may take up more of your daily time than the technical aspects of cybersecurity. And so the more comfortable you feel with that, the more confidence you can build in that, the more effective you'll be. In fact, I see a lot of technical professionals taking public speaking courses and presentation courses. And I've been doing this for 25 years. This week, I just came out of a company called Mandel. They're real popular in helping people develop presentation skills. I just came through the Mandel course this week. You never stop learning how to better communicate. On the avenue side, there's kind of three main ways I can see breaking in, especially if you're very early in your career. One is, like you said, coming from the IT side of the house. You get a job anywhere in IT and you show an interest and a propensity for the security aspects of that, you will open doors and opportunities to migrate in that direction. And so that's a good way to start. And that could be an IT organization of any medium or large size enterprise. And interestingly, the smaller the organization is, the more responsibilities an individual IT person has. So if you've got IT skills in general, you will just naturally have security aspects that are part of your job at smaller organizations. As you get in larger organizations, then you specialize, but you often have opportunities to move around there. The second avenue is through consulting. There's a lot of organizations that have cybersecurity practices of all kinds. They're always looking for fresh, energetic talent to come in and help their ranks, and they're willing to spend a lot of time teaching you the ins and outs of cybersecurity. So I do see a lot of people coming to cybersecurity through the auditing and consulting ranks of PwC and Deloitte and smaller regional cybersecurity vendors. The third one, which sometimes, depending on the organization, you might be able to get in very early in your career. Sometimes you have to come with a little bit of experience of some kind, is through the vendor side of cybersecurity, where you actually go and work either in the consulting ranks or in the technology ranks of a cybersecurity company, actually helping them to service customers in a particular cybersecurity technology. Those chances are a little bit easier if you have certifications or previous experience using the technology of that company, which you can gain through the first two avenues or even on your own. But some of the larger organizations do sponsor interns and fresh college graduates into their consulting ranks in particular, sometimes into engineering ranks as well. So if you like to build the technology more than you like to apply it, then there's sort of both of those avenues. And really, it's worth kind of interviewing across all three of those areas to see which ones might interest you the most. I actually went through the IT ranks. Within IT, I became an internal consultant, and then I became an external consultant, and then I joined an ISV and started selling their products and implementing them, and eventually moved into managing the products, actually defining them, and then ultimately marketing the products. So my career path has been, it started in that consultative area, which is interesting. The very first job you might have in cybersecurity is teaching other people about cybersecurity,
yeah.
and or helping them implement it. And so I do think those are the paths that I see, and it really just depends on your personality and your desire around interacting with people versus more about building the technology or implementing it. And I think that you just kind of have to be open to the opportunities that are there, because you'll see in any career that you have the ability to evolve and change. And usually within anywhere you get a foothold, you can show interest and propensity for doing the thing you want to do, and eventually it just happens. It's magic in terms of a career path. And there's certainly a lot of need, but you have to be building those skills along the way. And they start out with the kind of general skills of communication and technology, but eventually it becomes more specialized as you gain experience with particular technologies or areas of security.
Fantastic. I mean, I say something very similar. I say to a lot of people that I interact with, I did a bit of guest lecturing myself, and I say to those guys, I say, look, get as broad as you can a base for at least the first kind of 3 or 4 years of your career. Just learn as much as you can, governance, technology, compliance. Just do as much as you can feasibly do in the companies that you go to work for. And it's quite interesting what you said earlier on about smaller companies. You can very quickly get a lot more importance, and you can get access to stuff a lot quicker than sometimes in the larger organizations, where sometimes you can be a bit pigeonholed into a particular role, and sometimes it's quite hard to migrate out. It's a very odd arrangement in a big organization. Some big organizations are great, and you can kind of shift sideways throughout your career and you can get some good exposure, but some are very, no, that's what you do, that's where you're working, don't cross into someone else's territory, you might get into trouble. And it sounds like we had a very similar kind of background, because like yourself, I mean, I got into it, I started out in IT, and I really got into security. One, I was interested in it, but two, nobody wanted to do it. I mean, we're talking in the sort of like mid '90s, kind of the Y2K debacle, and it was very much nobody wanted to look after the AV. It wasn't sexy, it wasn't cool. You wanted to be a server admin or something like that, or in charge of Exchange. When it came to AV, it's like, oh god, I don't want to deal with that. But I took that on board, and like yourself, once you get a taste for it, I moved into working for a consulting firm who dealt with AV when it was such a big ticket item, which is weird because we're seeing a bit of a big resurgence of endpoint security now, as it's called,
Yep.
because of the nature of where we are. So, I mean, something you mentioned actually, certifications. I do ask this of a lot of the people I interview, because, I mean, there's a billion certifications out there, and if we're honest, quite a few of them aren't really that great. I mean, how important do you think certifications are? Is there are they important at the beginning, but then they kind of taper off as you get more experience, or, and if, what kind of certifications would you recommend for your area?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. There are a lot of different paths from a certification point of view you can go, and I kind of have two aspects to it. One is just the continuous learning side. I never fault someone for showing interest in learning new, and I would say that there's kind of two different types of paths you can go with certifications. One would be the kind of general knowledge certifications about being a cybersecurity professional, and there's several of those. And those frameworks are good, and I think are necessary, especially as a table stakes for getting certain types of cybersecurity jobs, especially if you want to be known as an expert. Let's not forget, though, that there's also vendor-specific certifications. Those are really interesting, especially if you're in an area of technology where you want to, command a little bit more money, or if you want to command a little bit more exclusivity. There, if you're in an area, and we have this in identity, a lot of what we do certifications of our professionals, both our customers and people who implement our products, and now we've become a big enough company. You actually see people hiring, asking for people with those certifications, and so it does become a ticket into some opportunities. It does open doors. But I think the more important part of certifications is the willingness to continually learn and improve. And I think that knowledge base, even if you don't get a certificate at the end of the effort, right, that knowledge base is going to make you more credible and more valuable in your career. So it's more that I encourage the continuous learning and improvement. than I do necessarily a particular set of initials to put on my CV.
Absolutely. I mean, I found the same thing. I think, we've all seen the job specs. They always say either CISSP or CISM, and I say to people, look, first 5 years of your career, probably best start working towards one of those, because
Yep.
every job posting you see always has those two. It's like back in the day. You remember the MCSEs. If you wanted to
Mm-hmm.
get into to sort of network support in a Windows environment, you had to have your MCSE. I haven't seen one of those in a long time. I don't even know if they're still around now. I mean, I had my NT4 MCSE. That's how old I am. But you see a lot of those vendor specific ones, and they're brilliant if you're kind of in that technology space and you're moving forward. And definitely, you do see it on job specs. I have found with my career, because I went down the CISO path, I went down the consulting path and the audit path. Obviously, I've still got my audit certifications, like a QSA certification. I have to maintain that.
Yep.
But I found my certifications mean less as I've gotten further on. Once you get that level of experience, they still ask for it, but more often than not, if you've got 10 years, 15 years worth of experience, people go, oh, they look at that first, and then they go, oh, do you have any certifications? And it's kind of a footnote then. Whereas that first 5 years, it's very much, do you have your CISSP or CISM? Yes, I do. Fantastic. Right. You're in for the running then. It's quite interesting.
It's much more about opening doors of opportunity. Ultimately, once you have some experience under your belt, the more doors open to you a little bit easier. But when you don't have a lot of experience on your belt, those certifications are a way to set yourself apart and begin the conversation. But ultimately, it's going to be about your ability to communicate, your broad knowledge, and then over time, your experience, right? When you're starting out early, they don't expect a lot of experience. They expect a lot of potential. And so that'll be judged on, do I want to work with this person every day? Can they communicate to the customer? Can they deliver the technology side of the house? And I think those are the evaluation criteria that people are going, and showing that balance and that enthusiasm and energy is important, but you have to be able to open the door, and some of those certifications can at least allow you to not have the door closed on you.
Brilliant. Totally agree. So we're coming towards the end of our time. So I'm going to ask you the question. I ask this of everybody, and you're going to get it as well, Corey. Let's say you had a time machine and you went back in time, and there's young Corey. He's just gotten his first job in infosec, his first infosec role. And maybe you're sat there at a bar, maybe sat there at a coffee shop, and you've just gotten the call, and you're like, fantastic, I am now an infosec person. I vaguely remember that time myself when I got that call. And let's say you head back through and you suddenly find yourself there, and you think, you know what, I'm going to give myself a little bit of advice. What are my top tips I'm going to give to myself? And you sit down next to yourself and you say, here, son, I'm going to give you some tips. What would you recommend to yourself based on what you know now to who you were back then?
It's an interesting question, because we don't spend a lot of time in self-reflection, I think, right? We always think, what's next, what's coming, and what do we prepare for? And reflecting back on my career, in one sense, I've been very happy with my career, and so changing it would be hard. But I actually think that if I had known earlier in my career the things I learned later in my career, I might have accelerated my path a little bit. And I think that's the things I alluded to today. One is, we call it here at CyberArk bold but humble, right? I think those two kind of interesting, opposing things. If I had learned some of these things earlier in my career, there was times where I was too passive and wasn't bold enough. I stuck to my lane. I didn't go out and show curiosity and ask questions and have a point of view. Or there was times where I knew what I was talking about. I was the smartest guy in the room, but I wasn't able to influence the people I needed to influence because my attitude was wrong, or my humility was not balancing out my ability to have that knowledge. And I think that's that some of that comes with age and experience. People are going to go, learn the same lessons that we learned in our career. But I would say that that cybersecurity is not like an add-on, like it's not a general and accounting service. It's not like keeping track of the money or managing facilities or even building a data center. It really is something that can be at the core and heart of an organization, in terms of their ability to change how the business is done, how quickly they can move, how confidently they can move, and realize that your role has that potential. And so understanding more about the business and understanding the impact your decisions have, not just to maintaining security and reducing risk, but also to helping the business unlock their potential. I think that the earlier in your career you can realize the impact that you have in your job, I think the more motivating it is, and the more it'll open your blinders from what you are specializing on, to the impact you're having in the wider audience. And so for my advice to folks earlier in their career is to be curious, to ask questions, not just of your fellow cybersecurity professionals, but of the parts of the business that you're impacting and what they do and why it's important, and learn to align your efforts to the stakeholders outside of cybersecurity, not just in cybersecurity. And you're going to find that your career really takes an accelerated path the sooner you do that. And that's such a hard balance, because as a lot of cybersecurity people come at it from the perspective of technologists. They love the technology, the challenge, the aura of being a bit of having a superpower that other people don't have, and that's great. But it has to be balanced with what very non-technical people are motivated by, and that's about building their own opportunities. And the more you can align what your powers are to what their powers are, the more success you're going to see in your career. And ultimately, it's what set me apart as my career went through. The more I built that understanding of how the business as a whole worked, the more my technical expertise became valued by the whole organization. And so it's looking back, it's been my greatest strength, but as I was building it was my greatest weakness. and I think if someone had told me earlier on, be bold, ask questions. You're part of the organization. You're not just, you're part of the company, not just part of cybersecurity. Understand what the company does and what's important. You'll find that just asking those questions and learning those things, you'll become a valued voice in every conversation. And that's ultimately what I think cybersecurity is there's a consultative side to the business that is such an important piece. And all those skills we talked about, communication, both written and verbal, are going to be able to take the knowledge and wisdom you build over time. And it's funny, don't you find that so many seasoned cybersecurity individuals are kind of professorial in their the really successful people? They're the ones that communicate really complex, interesting things. And I find the best cybersecurity professionals over time are the ones that become teachers and enablers, and are empathetic to the whole organization. And it always starts out as technological curiosity, and it always ends up in these kind of communication roles.
And it's a crazy environment in infosec, because I mean, IT moves at a rate of knots. We all know that. We've experienced that. We experience that every year, something crazy and new. I mean, Christ, on my phone, I can play games that I had on my PC 2 years ago, faster and quicker. You never. But with infosec, you have to be so adaptive. You have to be so willing. The problem solving. Something has happened, right? What's happened? The investigative skills, the psychological skills as well, being able to read the room and what's going on, and comms, as you say, fantastic. No, I totally agree on absolutely all of that. Corey, it has been absolutely fantastic to have you on the channel. Thank you ever so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, you as well, James. Thanks.
Fantastic. Right, so thank you everybody for watching. Again, thanks for tuning in. Please feel free to press the subscribe button and maybe the bell button if you want notifications of when new content is being released. We're always releasing new content. If there's anything that you want us to include, or maybe you've got some questions for Corey that we can have a look at and give you some answers for, please feel free to get in touch with us. You'll find in the description the details of how to contact us. Again, Corey, it's been absolutely fantastic. Have a great time, and look after yourself, mate.
Thanks.